these large infrastructure projects are all going to outlive changes of government, right?
Well, Jacinda Ardern opened Transmission Gully,
The Infrastructure Commission says that we spend as much on infrastructure as anyone else, but the way we spend it is less effective.
They've done well at investing in people and technology in the past. It's fair to say right now, obviously we're resizing in the industry because there's not enough work to go around.
New roading infrastructure where the NZTA recommends we should toll it, we will toll it.
Welcome to the Weekly Wrap. I'm Jonathan Mitchell. This week, NBR looks at how to improve New Zealand's alarmingly poor infrastructure in our week-long NBR Focus series. First up, Infrastructure Minister Chris Bishop speaks with us about the pinch points with publicly funded infrastructure.
Look, we know we've got a massive infrastructure challenge. I mean, how serious is it?
Well, it's big. I'm sort of less focused on the quantum. People give you different numbers. Is it 100 billion, 200 billion? I see ASB talks about $1 trillion deficit, which sort of seems so fantastical as to be unreal. So, but we know we have it, and you can see it on our roads, or on our rail network. In energy, water is the most notable example, which I think is on top of mind for many people, in Wellington and other parts of the country. So there's our deficit, and we need to fix it, and we're very focused on that. And fixing it's going to take time. We can't just do it all overnight.
The Infrastructure Commission, I think, in its reports points out that on a per capita basis, we're in line with other OECD countries. But there's a problem with the effectiveness of our spend.
Yes.
And I think you've got the latest investment report out around how government departments deal with investment in assets. And I mean, what's the problem?
Well, there are multiple issues in the system. We've just published the quarterly investment report, which we're intending to do quarterly, and it's essentially treasury analysis of Crown investments in planning and delivery business case process across the Crown infrastructure system, and it's designed to show greater transparency around what the Crown is funding and how that's going, and also how government departments who do a lot of the investing are going, and unfortunately the early indications are they're not great. So, just to pull out a couple of things that the Treasury highlights, inconsistent and immature data, lack of long-term planning, insufficient attention on the importance of reporting, inconsistent application of investment management rules, business cases not completed adequately, reporting's not provided, gateway assurance refusal not undertaken, poorly scoped investments, cost overruns and delays, not appropriate decision points for Cabinet. So that's kind of what we've inherited, and I want to make it clear that this is not a party political thing. That actually if we're honest about it, the lack of focus on investment discipline goes back across multiple years, and that's one of the things that the Infrastructure Commission has been highlighting in recent years. So there's a lot of work underway to fix that, but as I say, we're not going to do it straight away.
Well, picking up the reference to party political, I mean, and talking to the sector, I mean, one of the things they're really crying out for is some political consensus around the infrastructure pipeline so that they have greater certainty.
Yes.
Now, we've talked to Barbara Edmonds. She says that Labor's prepared to try and talk about that. What are the chances of building some greater consensus than we've perhaps seen in recent years around infrastructure?
I think better than we've ever had. One of the things we've started work on is a thing called the 30-year National Infrastructure Plan. I've tasked the Infrastructure Commission with creating that. So that plan will be created by independent experts in the Commission. That's an independent, I mean, it's a Crown institution, but it's independent of me as Minister. And so they've been tasked with getting on with the job of doing that. The aim is to publish the final version of that late next year. So it's not something we're just kind of cooking up overnight and doing on the fly. It's a serious piece of work. It's going to look at, over the next 30 years, what do we need in terms of our infrastructure, both built and non-built. Because again, one of the points the Commission's been making for a while is that focusing on what we already have and getting more out of it and maintaining it properly is very important. So focusing on built and non-built solutions, sector by sector, but also broken down by regions, and then looking at priority projects that the country needs as well. So they've been asked to do that, and I've had a conversation with Barbara Edmonds about that, and I think that the odds that we can get some sort of consensus is quite good. What I would like to see us get to is a position where political parties say, yep, that's the 30-year plan, that's where we're going to head to. And now we might have a debate about the funding tools, although I'd like to get some consensus around that as well. And there might be a bit of debate around the edges of projects, but the broad contours, the tram lines of what the country's going to build and not build and how we're going to do it, I'd like to be able to get to a position in the next couple of years where we can get consensus on that, because I hear the same thing from industry, and it's a completely legitimate point.
So rather than getting, I think we had Labor basically scrap National's roads of national significance. Yeah. You've come in, you've scrapped Auckland Light Rail, the ferry up, at the moment anyway, those sorts of things. You possibly, if there was a broader agreement, you wouldn't get those sort of U-turns on major projects? Or? Yeah,
I think that's right. I mean, without litigating the past, I think, and without being too political about it, I think, we are really bearing the brunt now of the decisions made in 2018 around the 4-lane roads that Phil Twyford's first government policy statement essentially scrapped. But think of my own electorate of the Hutt Valley, Melling is only just getting started. You think about the 4-lane road out of Tauranga on the Northern Link. It's being built, but it could have started in 2018. That was about to be. They were about to sign the contract on that. That road would basically be built by now. So a lot of people left New Zealand as a result of that. We lost that pipeline. Just got smashed. To your point before around the pipeline uncertainty, people were gearing up for those roads. Like Tauranga Northern Link was about to be. They were about to sign the contract, and so we are bearing the brunt of that. If Labor were here, they would say, the Auckland Light Rail project, we've scrapped it. We've scrapped it because it's just way too expensive. But do we need better public transport in Auckland? Yes, we do. We absolutely do. And we've committed to a variety of sensible projects like the North Western Busway. And other projects in Auckland. So it would be good to get some sort of consistent investment pipeline. A bit like the way we have done this in the past. So Waikato Expressway was a 20-year project, that started basically under Annette King, and then Stephen Joyce really supercharged it through the key government years, and then kept being built in the last years.
Well, that is the thing, isn't it? Because these large infrastructure projects are all going to outlive changes of government, right?
Well, Jacinda Ardern opened Transmission Gully, City Rail Link started life under National. Eventually we funded it, and there was a big debate about that. We funded it, started it. It's still being built, and probably Simeon Brown will get to cut the ribbon on it. There's 3 different governments have been involved in that project. The Northland Expressway we've been talking about, 4 lanes up to Whangarei, that will take 15 years to build probably. It'd be good to your point around certainty, it'd be good if Labor didn't cancel that project, because eventually they will be back in government. They used to call that road the Holiday Highway, and they were really opposed to it. But I don't know many people up north who aren't in favour of a 4-lane road up there. The single best thing you could do economically for the north is greater transport connectivity. They didn't cancel the Waikato Expressway. In fact, they used to argue they started it. So, there's a lot of kind of back and forward about who does what.
But look, on financing and funding, you're talking about tolls, value capture, yes, congestion charging and the like. But again, you've talked about wanting to get political consensus around that.
Yes.
But and part of that also isn't about trying to encourage more private sector investment, whether it's and from things like maybe the New Zealand Super Fund, KiwiSaver account, but where they can get a return.
Yeah.
How hopefully are you of developing the tools that can allow that sort of investment?
Well, this is what I'd like to talk to Labor about. Congestion pricing, we've it feels like 2 steps forward, 1 step back sometimes. Michael Wood had a draft piece of legislation when he was Transport Minister. We had some conversations around that. It's Simeon's area, so it's for him to talk to. But I think across the 4 major parties in Parliament, there is, from the last Parliament anyway, there is consensus around time of use pricing, congestion pricing. So I'm hopeful we can do that with a degree of political consensus. But as I say, Simeon's working away on that issue. Likewise with tolling, we have toll roads now in New Zealand. Tauranga Eastern Link, for example, was built under the last national government, helped to be financed by toll roads. We want to make greater use of them. They're not going to be. The starting point will be we'll try and toll it if we can, but not every road will be able to be tolled. Labor's been a bit. They've thrown a few barbs about tolls raising the price and things. Well, it's just a different way of funding a road. You can either you can either fund it through the Crown just shoveling out money, or road users generally shoveling out money for it, or you can make sure that part of the cost of the road is paid for by the people who use it. That's what tolls do. You know, it's $5 to drive on a 20-kilometre 4-lane expressway. You're using it and you're helping to fund the road.
And they
so it's just
did
a
have
different
the
way.
Auckland Harbour Bridge, right?
Well, that's how the Auckland Harbour Bridge was built. You know, this is how we used to build infrastructure. You know, the Auckland Harbour Bridge was funded through tolls. And so it's not like it's a new concept. But, you know, and people don't necessarily like the idea of it, but actually increasingly I get people who say to me, just, you know, build this and whatever project they're keen on, just toll it. We'll pay. We just want it built.
Do you have any concerns about, I guess, the state of the infrastructure sector itself? You know, the businesses that are around that are going to both maintain and build infrastructure?
Look, I think people want us to get on with things, and I totally hear that. You know, the change of government has produced a degree of it's been a little bit destabilising, I think it'd be fair to say, and that sort of happens naturally with every change, a bit like the public sector and a lot of industries. You know, people, well, before the election, this is arguably the problem with 3-year election cycles, you know, so 3, 4, 6 months before an election, everyone kind of goes into hibernation mode, like waiting to see what will happen, and then the government changes, people get their ducks in a row, and then, you know, you come out the other side. So it's quite a long time when you actually add it all up. So, people want us to get on with maintenance and investing, and that is coming. And that is, well, in fact, the funding's there. The GPS that Simeon's landed has a huge amount more funding for maintenance, pothole prevention, things like that. Likewise, if you look at the council long-term plans, a lot of money going into water, and that's really important. So our message to the people doing the contracting is get on with it and get the money out the door, because the civil contractors out there keen and eager to do the work, and there's a lot of work to do. There's a lot of maintenance, there's a lot of stuff that's got to be built, and there's a lot of money in the system. Get on with it, because, you know, New Zealand's can't wait.
Bishop thinks we need to put partisan interests aside to get some sort of agreement. To find out if that's possible, here's opposition infrastructure spokesperson Barbara Edmonds.
Is it possible for Labor and National parties to actually agree on infrastructure priorities?
We're going to try, because it's been really clear and it's coming out really strongly in all the infrastructure meetings I've been to, events, the sector and the construction sector, that we need to work together on this. So they want to see it, and the great thing is that they're saying it out loud. So we're going to try our best to work together on this, and we have reached across the House, and we do have a commitment from the Minister of Infrastructure himself, Chris Bishop, that he will try to work with us too.
You know, voters could be a bit cynical about this. I mean, there have been really big areas of disagreement. The Labor scrapped National's roads of national significance, and this government has scrapped a number of your infrastructure plans, including about 3 waters. So how can you possibly get agreement?
It comes down to, one, transparency over the different mechanisms that the government wants to go ahead with. You know, what I understand from the Minister, as he said in Select Committee, that the Infrastructure Commission, they want to look to a model where the Infrastructure Commission provides this 30-year strategy, which is actually a requirement already under the Act, but actually a pipeline, so a certainty of pipeline, and that he is willing to work with us in relation to that pipeline. I mean, it's true, governments will come in, they'll have different value sets, they'll have different strategies. To your point around the roads of national significance, a really good example is in Wellington, Transmission Gully, one of the largest infrastructure projects that the country has seen, which is a major roadway through a new State Highway 1 through to Wellington. You know, and the Labor government came in, we could have removed that, but we knew that basically the uncertainty that would cause, obviously the cancellation fees if we went ahead with it, so we decided to continue with it, and, you know, it came down to about $1.5 billion.
You talk about this 30-year infrastructure plan to help remove uncertainty from the infrastructure pipeline, but how will that actually work when you have a 3-year electoral cycle?
And that's a really good question, really, for the minister, because again, we had a 30-year strategy, and again, the different parties have an ability to choose the projects. But my understanding from the minister is he wants us to be involved as part of that process, so that we can agree together to the types of projects. But also by putting it into an infrastructure commission, similar to a Farm Act model, it takes the politics out of it. The decisions are made at arm's length and independently.
But haven't we had a 30-year strategy before, back in 2015, 2018, and we could just see the same thing happen again?
So that's a strategy, but the way that the minister has spoken about it in the select committee, it's more around the project. So again, we're willing to work with the government, because we know the decisions such as removing the ferries, which has happened quite recently, that has had huge implications both internationally and for us, the money cost, and then the delay of us going back to the back of the queue, or the country going back to the back of the queue for new ferries. So we want to try and avoid that. We want to work pragmatically with the government. And I'll say to you, Simon, like being in opposition, this has been 8 months. The biggest lesson I've learned coming into opposition is that when we come back into government, we have to take a really pragmatic view at what's on the table and understand all the different trade-offs and the consequences when it comes to those projects. We've also said that where we disagree really clearly around something, we will signal it very early so that there's greater certainty for the sector.
Will that pragmatic approach that you talk about extend to financing and funding? Are you prepared to look at toll roads or value capture, the congestion charging, the other mechanisms to actually pay for this infrastructure?
So again, the government can't fully pay for everything through a different mechanism such as tolls or through value or congestion charging. So the government, no matter who it is, will need to fund it somehow or have a contribution to it. In relation to what we would do around whether we would agree with the tolling and the value charging and the congestion charging, again, the government is clearly going through that process now. We have learnt through the Transmission Gully project that you can't just come in, you can't unwind this all, and sometimes it's really hard to do that with contracts. Anybody in the sector knows that contract law is really difficult. It comes with a penalty, and it's something that we want to avoid for the greater good.
So are you sort of giving a guarantee that you would not just throw things out if you got back in, that you would actually agree with whatever sort of funding mechanism this government puts in place?
Well, we've had to agree on different circumstances. For example, we come in and there's a whole raft of projects that are PPPs. We've had to leave it as a PPP because we knew that the decision to unwind it would have cost us more, and we would have reneged on quite, solid contracts. Where we want the government, though, to do, what we want them to do is when they're looking at these contracts, making sure the risk threshold is clear. Where does the risk lie? We don't want New Zealand to be, having to carry all the risk. Having a look at the affordability threshold right at the beginning of a contract that they enter into. These are really clear, there's some really clear examples where if you get the contract right at the beginning and you take your time with it, then it basically over the long-term view of the asset or as the construction of the asset occurs, that it just creates greater certainty for all.
All right, there's been a lot of talk about the need for more investment from players like the New Zealand Super Fund or even KiwiSaver funds, those kinds of funding sources. What's your view on that kind of investment?
We're absolutely open to it. And, one of the changes that Grant Robertson did when he was one of his last pieces of legislation was the superannuation fund, the ability for the super fund to have a controlling interest in an entity. He put that bill through the House. Nicola Willis picked it up as the Minister of Finance, and we supported that. She supported it, and then we supported that through the reading of the bill. So we absolutely want to enable to, be able to use these funds that are basically growing. The super fund is outperforming where it's meant to be. KiwiSaver funds are growing. We want to try and be able to provide the projects in order for them to be able to invest back into New Zealand. But it does have to be at scale.
If that funding is available or the funding mechanisms are there, are you confident that the capability of the infrastructure is there to match it and to actually deliver that pipeline?
And again, that's really a question for the Minister. So what we're seeing at the moment with the big sway in infrastructure projects being stopped and started, for example, with hospitals, housing and with education, that's the risk that happens if you put a handbrake on, is that labour is very mobile, and these are very skilled workers who can go overseas. So we want to see some strong plans from the government. We actually need them to basically take the handbrake off and continue with a lot of the build programs. That's what I'm hearing clearly from the infrastructure and the construction sector, and they've written to the Minister saying, please take the handbrake off.
Are you hearing concerns from the infrastructure sector and the construction sector that these kinds of handbrakes or these kinds of changes in policies are detrimental to, the pipeline of workers and labour that we actually have here?
Absolutely. And they've written a letter. 3 of the key organisations in the infrastructure sector wrote to the Minister maybe about 2 months ago now saying, please take the handbrake off. We need to continue with these builds or else we're going to be losing workers. We're going to lose basically the ability to bring financing in and the skilled people and equipment that they need in order to complete these different builds.
The Infrastructure Commission says that we spend as much on infrastructure as anyone else, but the way we spend it is less effective. Have you heard of this, and what do you think? Why do you think that is?
So we've had the Infrastructure Commission before us at Select Committee. I'm on the Finance and Expenditure Select Committee. They are the experts in this area. I've got no reason to disbelieve what they say, and I think if there's a way for us to be able to work together to find where those efficiencies are, where we are being inefficient, then we will provide our support for that. But you make a really good point. The financing and funding is where the rubber's going to hit the road with our political parties. But again, we are open to looking at things because in the long run, New Zealand cannot have these big sways, and we want to be able to provide certainty for everyone.
I guess at the end of the day, this is doing your duty to the voters and the taxpayers to provide the tools that they need to get on with everyday life and make New Zealand more productive. Can you guarantee us that you'll try and cross that political divide to deliver this?
Simon, I'm a mother of 8 children, and for me, I look at finance and economics as about people. I'm looking about the long-term view. In 2060, when my eldest daughter goes to retire, what is the society we're going to leave her and the children of her and the children of that generation? I'm absolutely willing to be able to work with the government because I come from it in a collaborative perspective that we need to take the politics as much as we can out of this. We need to have certainty and we need to be able to support what New Zealand needs for now and for future generations.
Civil Contractors New Zealand speaks about giving the industry more confidence.
For New Zealand to maintain and build quality infrastructure, it needs a resilient civil contracting sector. I'm joined by Civil Contractors New Zealand Chief Executive, Alan Pollard. So how resilient is the sector at the moment?
It's struggling at the moment. I guess if you look at the whole economy, everyone is struggling with inflation, with interest rates and so on. I think the infrastructure sector struggles a little bit more in that the things we build are very expensive, take a long time to build, and because of that they can become a political hot potato. So we have the vagaries of short parliamentary terms and short local government terms as well, which is an extra complication for us.
So I guess there were some projects that you might have been looking forward to, like Auckland Light Rail, for instance, or the ferry sort of replacement in terms of all of the onshore. That's gone now.
Yeah, it has. But look, we know that there's a lot of work coming. We know from the Infrastructure Commission, they've said that there's a $210 billion infrastructure deficit. And we know that the current government have committed to trying to bridge that. So we have confidence looking medium to long term. Our challenge is in the intervening period, there's not a lot of work out there.
Yeah. And now there's talk about putting together this 30-year plan and getting list, and we've actually both major political parties talking about trying to reach some agreement. Is that political consensus? What difference would that make when you would have certainty about exactly which projects would be coming online and essentially when?
Oh, look, it's critical for us so that we can actually mobilise our people and resources to be available at the time that they come on stream. I was really encouraged that the Prime Minister was recently on Australia, and of course he spoke about exactly that, an intergenerational view of infrastructure assets. There's no doubt there's quite a big difference left and right on what they will fund and won't fund, but there is some commonality as well. So our view is if we could sign off and commit to some of the projects long term, that's going to go a long way towards giving our industry more confidence.
I just want to talk about the sector a little bit. I think there's about 7 or so businesses that have got revenue turnover of over 100 million and a few between the 50 and 100, but then many others, which you would call small, medium-sized businesses. Are they largely involved in local council work or subcontracting to those larger contractors? How does that sector work?
Yeah, it's a mixture of both. And you're right, we represent 530 contractors, so you have the top 6 or 7, the largest ones, but you have a very long tail of small to medium businesses, all who play a really important role in the infrastructure and construction work. Yeah, there's probably 3 ways that they operate. So the first is absolutely subcontracted to the larger main contractors. The second is that they do have work given to them directly by local authorities and some branches of central government. The third one, of course, is private investment and development as well. And so not only has the public sector funding, if you like, reduced, developers haven't been investing either, with interest rates so high and confidence down.
But again, I mean, in terms of when we talk about infrastructure, and I know the focus often will get on these large new bits of infrastructure, but as the Infrastructure Commission points out, a lot of the money that's spent, certainly by the public sector, is on maintenance.
Yes.
I mean, and how much of that work, you know, obviously your sector's doing a lot of that work. I mean, how much of a role does that play?
Well, maintenance plays a huge role, and if you consider the fairly recent conversations about potholes, which have become quite an emotive conversation, the fault is that over many years we haven't invested well enough in maintaining the roads. So a pothole is just a symptom of a much bigger problem that's happening on the road. And if I fix one on the left, there'll be one on the right shortly. What we haven't done well, we being the clients done well historically, is actually put enough funding and effort into maintaining the roads to a standard that they won't develop potholes in the short term.
Yeah, so that's renewing, resealing and that properly and following a proper maintenance program. And we're not doing that well here.
Historically, we haven't, and some of that's budget. But the trouble is, if you compromise your budget and capital outlay, you're sure as heck going to use it in maintenance in a very short time in the future.
I mean, the same thing goes for pipes in the ground, right? We keep on fixing leaks rather than renewing the pipes. Is that?
Absolutely. Look, Wellington's the classic example of that, of course. 46% of the water goes and leaks down the drain. And you're right, the leaks are not the problem. The main water pipes are the problem. And they haven't, again, invested enough money over a number of years now to fix that. And I have to say, let's talk about 1.8 billion being available over the next 10 years. That will only scratch the surface of what Wellington needs in particular.
And I wonder whether, because of the way we're dealing with infrastructure, in terms of the way the owners are dealing with that sort of, both in terms of maintenance, so you're fixing a pothole here, you're fixing a leak there, then if you come to the larger infrastructure projects, will it go ahead or won't it go ahead? And coming to the question of investment, how much confidence then do the contractors have to invest in the technology, the equipment, and the training and staff to actually do those jobs?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, the members need some certainty on where the work's going to come from and what it might look like. They've done well at investing in people and technology in the past. It's fair to say right now, obviously, we're resizing in the industry because there's not enough work to go around. But contractors have proved very time and time again that they're prepared to invest where they have some confidence that the future work's there.
I mean, you say so the industry is sort of contracting at the moment, so you're not seeing new entrants, for instance, wanting to come in?
No, I mean, we saw a number of new entrants come in the cyclone, for example. A number of new businesses started, but they rapidly realised that you need a confident supply of work to stay in business. So, no, at the moment, most of our businesses are seeing what they can do to get through the next 12 months, because it looks like it's going to be 12 to 18 months before significant work starts to flow again. So they've got to take the steps that they can to survive in that environment. Equally, we've been saying to the government, the reason you had to invest now is that if we get to 12 months' time and suddenly the work starts to flow, there may not be enough people or equipment or technology available to actually deliver on them.
Is there a right size for a contracting business?
Look, not really. I know some people think that small contracting businesses are inefficient and unproductive, but small ones turn into big ones as well. And I think if you look at the scope of work right across everything we do, there's a place for everyone in that kind of mix of work.
And presumably they work together oftentimes, that, there's no one firm that just does necessarily a contract all on its own. I mean, particularly the big projects, there are normally dozens of different
Big projects in particular have a number of contractors involved, but there are some, the smaller jobs, where it is just unique to a contractor. And there might be as well some specialisation about the job. I mean, water's a good example of that, where they're specially trained in dealing with the water issues and the water installations to do that work. But it varies really depending on a mix of individual contracts or collaborating to deliver a project.
Is there a difference between the clients? I mean, I'm thinking particularly in the public sector. Is there a difference between dealing with central government and local councils? Are one or the other more difficult, or within the council area, some councils more difficult to deal with than others? Or?
No, not really. The challenge they've both got is that they're working from small bases. So if you look at the central government, they're dealing from a taxpayer base that's relatively small, and somehow they have to invest tax dollars into their funding. Local government has the same issue. Our population is small. If you look on the east coast where the cyclone hit, they don't have the population base there to provide the rates they need to invest fully in their restoration and remediation work. So it really depends on that.
And what about the impacts of climate change? People keep on talking about climate resilience. Is that an issue that comes up with your members?
Well, certainly it comes up, and we're dealing with this sort of the first responders in some of the major weather events, as you imagine. When the cyclone hit in Hawke's Bay and Northland in particular, our contractors were out there digging people out of their homes, shoring up property, saving pets as well. So they're the first responders. So inevitably we have an interest in how clients are planning for the resilience needed to support their local communities. Our view is that we'd like to engage earlier in the conversation. Too often we're engaged at a point in time when a contract's already been framed up, it's already been designed, and it's been put out to tender. We need to be involved much earlier because they have the expertise on the ground to add value, if you like, to that design and tendering process.
With the eye-watering amount needed to upgrade New Zealand's infrastructure, how do we access the money to do it? Here's Transport Minister Simeon Brown.
As the country faces the challenge maintaining existing infrastructure and building new, how do we pay for it? Let's talk transport, because you have made this announcement that you're bringing in legislation around congestion charging. Correct. What difference do you think congestion charging will make?
Well, ultimately that's a tool to help manage congestion. It's about ensuring the efficiency of the network so that people can get where they need to go quickly and safely. And so what we see in overseas examples is where you price congestion, you help spread that traffic over a period of time, which means you're able to actually move more people more efficiently rather than everyone getting on the motorways at exactly the same time. So that's the intent behind it. We want to reduce travel times, particularly help those tradies and concrete truck drivers and construction workers be able to get more work done, be more productive. We know Auckland loses, about $1.3 billion in productivity every year due to congestion. So it's about reducing that cost to the economy, improving productivity for New Zealand, and making sure people can get where they need to go quickly and safely.
And do you accept, I think, the Infrastructure Commission argument too, that it might also help alleviate infrastructure needs in the sense that if traffic is directed more efficiently, you won't need to build that extra road to cope with the congestion?
Well, I'd put it this way. I think it means that you can do some of that, but ultimately we have a growing city, and so you still need more capacity. We still need to increase the capacity of our roading network because we've got a growing population. That's why this government wants to build Mill Road, East-West Link, a new road, extend the western motorway up past Kumeu, build the northern corridor to Whangarei. We need more roading infrastructure. The second Waitemata harbour crossing, all of those things are about making sure we have the capacity in the network. Time of use charge, about ensuring we're maximising the benefit of it, making sure it's efficient and productive as possible. We also need more public transport infrastructure too. And so, we've got a proud record. National government last started the City Rail Link. We electrified the rail network in Auckland. We've now got the Eastern Busway under construction. We want to see the North-Western Rapid Transit Corridor built. We need more public transport options for Aucklanders as well. So we need more infrastructure, but time of use charging, but making sure we maximise the efficiency of it, making sure it's productive so people can get where they need to go quickly and safely.
So how do you pay for all that? Toll roads, PPPs, what are the funding and financing mechanisms you can use to try and get infrastructure built?
Well, first, there's a range of funding and financing tools, and we're open to using all of them. Firstly, money is collected from people who use the roads through their fuel excise duty and petrol taxes and road user charges. So that is a primary funder for building and maintaining the roading network. But it
hasn't been enough, though, has it?
No, and that's why we need new tools as well. So we've been very clear as a government new roading infrastructure where the NZTA recommends we should toll it, we will toll it, to ensure that we can recover the costs of that infrastructure from people who use it. Public-private partnerships are a way that you can get private sector financing to come and support the construction of infrastructure and operate it more efficiently over time as well. We're open to those. The Northern Corridor at the moment, the NZTA is actually doing a market sounding on the building and construction of that as we speak. So they're engaging with the market to try and find partnerships to be able to actually build and construct that. So we're really open to those types of tools to enable infrastructure to be built and also get that private sector involvement in, which helps to drive efficiency, bring new ideas, so that we can get that infrastructure built for New Zealanders.
Do you see the opportunities? I mean, people have talked about possibly, like ACC, New Zealand Super Fund, but also KiwiSaver accounts.
Yes.
The money there could
Totally.
be. But how do you track that in?
Well, that's what NZTA is doing right now with this market sounding. They're out there talking to funders, constructors, consortium who are interested in being part of constructing infrastructure in New Zealand. They're having those conversations as we speak around the Northern Corridor. Ultimately, there's 17 roads of national significance that we've identified in our government policy statement on transport. So there's a lot more projects which are going to require innovative funding and financing solutions for that. They've just started with the Northern RON. There's more to come. So ultimately, whether they're KiwiSaver providers, I know Superfund is interested. There's other funding and financiers out there who are interested in being part of the solution and bringing that international expertise with them at the same time, so we can actually get that pipeline of infrastructure underway this country desperately needs.
Because to get their money, you have to provide them with a revenue stream, right?
Yeah, and whether that's tolling, whether that's funding through the National Land Transport Fund or other tools that we need to make available, those are the conversations that will be had as part of that. We need to also look at the legislation around how we enable tolling in New Zealand, and we're doing some work around that at the same time.
I mean, because in retrospect, do you think maybe Transmission Gully would have been better as a toll road, as a revenue stream for the consortium that built that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is a classic case of a road which, if NZTA had recommended a toll, it should have been tolled. And so what's happened is we haven't looked at infrastructure in the past. The Hamilton bypass is another example. There's a huge travel time saving for, freight operators now who don't have to go through Hamilton but can bypass it. So when it comes to building new infrastructure, and there's an opportunity to ensure that people who use it are paying for it, and those who benefit from it are paying for it and contributing towards it, we should be putting those tolls in place.
Okay, I'll get you to put your local government hat on now. I mean, we know local government is struggling with the financing and funding of the sort of infrastructure it needs to put in place. I mean, I know you've announced the changes around water, which I think is aimed at allowing them to borrow more and the like. But what tools under these regional deals that you're going to put in place are you prepared to make available to local councils in terms of how they can finance and fund? Yeah,
well, I think firstly, the Local Water Done Well deal is an example of how this government wants to work with local government. And so when it comes to our water infrastructure, in just 9 months, we've replaced Labour's $1.25 billion mega entity approach, and we've provided a solution which allows councils to use council-controlled organisations, put their water assets and infrastructure and debt into those organisations, and the local government funding agency will lend to them up to 500% against their revenue. So that is a great example of how we're providing those tools to local governments and providing them the ability to invest over time. We're also putting in place economic regulation to make sure that those assets are being appropriately managed, that the investment is proportionate to what's required. We're not seeing gold plating, but we're also seeing ring-fenced revenue, so the revenues that's raised being ring-fenced back into that infrastructure. And so that's an example of how we are working with local government to support them with the challenges. And that's, water is one of the biggest challenges. And we've effectively provided a really good solution that we hope local governments take up and work through and get done as quickly as possible. In terms of regional deals, the approach there is say actually we need to have a long-term approach. We need to take a 30-year view, but chunk that down into 10 years and say what's needed around economic growth, infrastructure, housing to be unlocked in that region. What are the projects that need to be done to meet that? And then what are the tools which either local government has or central government have, and how can they be utilised together to deliver that infrastructure in that community? So look, tolling, with Infrastructure Funding and Financing Act, which we're looking at reforms over, whether that's making better use of levies or other types of tools that local government might have.
So sorry, you could have tolling on local roads as well as on...
Well, the legislation already enables that.
Yeah.
So it's actually having those conversations saying you've got a road that you'd like to build. What are the tools that are available? How can we enable that in your community to make sure that people who benefit from it are contributing towards it? So there's actually already a lot of tools in the toolbox. This is about saying, here's the priorities, here's the projects, here's how we're going to fund and finance it, and get that agreement at a high level between central and local government so we can then get on with actually delivering it.
Are you still considering the idea of sharing GST on new builds?
That's something we're looking at. Minister Chris Bishop is doing some work around that. It's part of our coalition agreement with the ACT Party to investigate that option. And look, there's some other options that we've looked at. One of the ones that was is in the framework that we've announced today is around sharing a share of royalties for new mines. That's something the New Zealand First has put forward as an idea to say actually if a council is going to be pro-economic development and investing in new mines, well, actually, there's a cost to that to the local council around roading infrastructure. Well, they should potentially benefit from some of that. So we want to say, look, this is about economic growth, infrastructure and housing. How can we work better together and ensure that local and central government are working together on that pipeline?
I mean, is the trend, though, because, you've commented, I guess, about the rates rises this year, roughly 15%, too much and the like. Is there more a trend then we might see that rather than focusing on rates, there might be a greater focus on user charges? And getting back to water, for instance, I think water charges will need to come in place for those councils who don't already...
Absolutely, and I think user charge is important because it means the people who actually benefit are paying. You're not seeing cross-subsidisation. It means you've got more accurate reflection of cost. And in the water space, we expect councils are going to start rolling out water meters. In Auckland, when we had the water shortage a few years ago, there was huge complaints about the fact that 15% of the water was being lost to leaks. Well, lo and behold, in Wellington, where they don't have water meters, we're losing almost 50%. That's actually embarrassing. And so, implementing water meters, having user pays, means that we can actually reduce our usage, better identify leaks, look after infrastructure better, and actually, if we're utilising less in the first place, means that those upgrades can be more efficient. So that's the approach that we're taking. And at the same time, those partnerships about actually identifying them, agreeing them, and then actually getting to delivery.
That's all for this week. Thanks for joining us. Remember, for all the business news you can use, head to mbr.co.nz. See you next week.